I'm very excited to welcome to the show today. We have Dave Rubin, the comedian, the host of Rubin Report, formerly of the Young Turks Network, now part of Ryot News. How's it going, man?
Kyle, it is good to be with you. I have DM'd you more this week than I've ever DM'd anyone. A lot of private thoughts, and we'll get them to a public square.
Oh, great, man. I'm really looking forward to this as well. There's so many different aspects to this conversation, and it's great to just basically think out loud and bounce ideas off somebody who I think we largely agree, but even the areas where we have minor disagreement, I think that even makes for a better conversation overall. So for people who don't know what we're referring to, there's this growing rift, I'd say, between the overall hardline progressive community, if you will, and the atheist or new atheist community. And a lot of it stems, in my opinion, I think, from total misunderstandings of the other side. So I've spoken quite a bit about, what I think of it, and I think the audience gets a good sense of where I stand on this. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, just broadly speaking, what do you make of this whole back and forth that's going on?
Yeah, well, first off, let's talk about the most important part, which, of course, is how everyone deals with this on Twitter. You, for example, you actually do fight with people. I have a strict policy, never argue with a Twitter egg. So I don't publicly argue with these people. They argue with me a lot, but I don't publicly argue with them. But I admire your push to keep the fight public, so to speak.
I have the same policy as you. I just haven't stuck by it.
Trust me, it's a better way to live. But
yeah, no, you're so right. That's so true.
Twitter etiquette's a whole other topic. I think this thing is absolutely fascinating, and when I really became aware of it was the night that Sam Harris was on Real Time with Bill Maher and the whole Ben Affleck, you're racist thing, and of course, Islam isn't a race and all that, and just the genuine lack of understanding of what they were talking about that night. Bill Maher and Sam were quoting Pew polls. I think Bill Maher did say one or two things that weren't quite, I don't want to say intellectually honest, but that weren't quite on the level when he said, we're allowed to say this stuff because we're the liberals. If I was a conservative, I don't think I would be happy with the liberal getting extra leash on something just because of the thing that they identify with. But what I thought was fascinating was the incredible part of Ben Affleck and the people that are siding with him in pretty much just making up what Sam Harris and Bill Maher and sometimes Richard Dawkins, what they're saying. Because Sam Harris, from everything I've seen, is just telling the truth. He's just looking at numbers. He's a scientist. He's looking at numbers. He's looking at data and saying, here's what the deal is. And he hates all religions. And I'm pretty sure Bill Maher hates all religions. Go watch his documentary. He pulls no punches on the big three, any of them. So that's where it started for me. And it's been really disappointing, actually, to see the way the progressive movement has attacked these guys.
Okay, so that's interesting, and I think my audience already knows, and I don't want to bore them to tears here, but I'll just sum it up real quick. I think my position is a little bit different than yours in that when I look at the back and forth between those two, when I say I see misunderstandings between them, I really mean I see total misunderstanding, and I actually think that both sides have legitimate concerns, and they're just screaming over each other's heads. So here's what I mean by that.
Who are you talking about when you say misunderstandings between them? Who are the them that you're talking about?
So, well, obviously Sam Harris and Bill Maher, and you could say the rest of the new atheists too. At times, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and people like that. Versus, you could say people like Glenn Greenwald, people like Cenk Uygur. C.J. Whirlman, I think, is a different case because I think he's just wrong about a lot of stuff, and I honestly think people might come after me for this, but I really don't think he's that bright of a person. So I'm kind of brushing him off to the side.
So who knows if it's his stuff, yeah.
So, so here's the way I look at it. To me, it's a matter of what do you choose to focus on? because every time I hear like the new atheists make a point and then the progressives counter, I never think it's like a point that's proving wrong the new atheists. I always feel like they're just adding on to the point that they made. So my advice to both sides has essentially been so here's my advice to the liberals. What you need to do if you're taking like the Glenn Greenwald line on this, what you need to do is, number one, I think you should distinguish between when atheists are tough on Muslims or Islam and when conservatives are, because I do think those are very different things. So in a way,
they're completely different things. Of course, Bill Maher and Sam Harris are not neocons, as some people have called them lately. Does Bill Maher want to freaking bomb Iraq? No. Exactly.
And I actually I think I'm even softer on the point that you made about Maher earlier, where you were like, well, I don't really agree with him when he says it's not Islamophobia when we do it. I'm actually kind of on the page that he's right, that it isn't Islamophobia when they do it because of every position that they've taken. Right.
Yeah, let me clarify that. I do agree with you, but I was just saying that I could see how a conservative would say, well, that's just not fair. Like, I could see the other argument in that, but I do agree with the heart of what you're saying. Sure.
But here's the reason why I take that position for everybody who might disagree with that. Context and perspective is everything. Not only does it count, in my opinion, it's absolutely everything. So, for example, when Joe Biden made that joke about they want to put y'all back in chains talking about black people, right?
Right.
The conservatives lost it, but I came out on my show and said, first of all, he's joking. Second of all, look at his record on race issues. The guy's not a racist. He's allowed to say it. But if Rush Limbaugh said something that included put y'all back in chains, I would probably say it's racist because it probably would be racist.
Of course.
When I look at
go ahead.
When I look at Bill Maher and Sam Harris, I see the same kind of thing going on here. You have to look at what are their positions on abortion, foreign policy, gay rights. You go down the list, every single policy issue, and if you're checking off the list and you're basically over 80% agreement with them, you're not allowed to then just dismiss them as if they're Dick Cheney or as if they're George Bush, because that doesn't make any sense. That would be silly for somebody to do that. So,
Kyle, I hate coming on a show and agreeing with someone 100%, but in this part, you are 100% correct. You are 100% correct.
Thank you. But I think I'll get to area disagreement.
Context matters. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me just get to the second. So that's what I would say to the liberals, okay? And I would also say to the liberals this other part, which I think you'd agree with me, that terrorism isn't always because of victimization. So, in other words, like, there's oftentimes people on the left look for, the rationalizations or justifications or the reason why. What's the underlying cause for terrorism? And they let's be honest, they do that a lot with Muslim terrorism. You don't see them scrambling for the underlying cause of KKK terrorism or sovereign citizens terrorism or any other kind of terrorism. In those areas, they go, oh, it's sufficient enough to say that these guys are idiots and they're crazy. So what I would say to liberals is, first of all, acknowledge that there's sometimes terrorism that is not from victimization. There's no underlying cause. And it's just like, okay, they read a holy book and they believe it and they're acting out in that respect. So that's what I want the liberals to admit. When it comes to the atheists and the new atheists, what I want them to do is not necessarily change anything that they believe in. I just want them to, I honestly think Sam Harris can defang and take the venom out of all of his critics if he just did the Eminem trick. You know the Eminem trick that he did in his movie 8 Mile, where when he responds in the rap battle, he basically says everything that's embarrassing about himself before he attacks the other side. So in other words, if Sam Harris came out and he said, look, I'm going to give you like a 5-minute or 10-minute diatribe as to the specifics as to why American foreign policy is beyond fucked up, and I'm going to give you a 5-minute diatribe as to real concrete examples of victimization of Muslims in America, like, for example, increased hate crimes after 9/11, or like the fact that the NSA basically admitted they even spy on moderate Muslims. So if he came out and he did the Eminem trick and went through all of that stuff, and then he made literally every single point the same after that he always makes, I honestly think the left would largely shut up. And I honestly think they'd go, well, I think he's pretty much right.
All right, well, okay, we got our point of disagreement. Although I think that mission statement by Sam would be fine, I don't think they would stop. I think they would dismiss that stuff immediately, saying, he's just trying to moderate himself, but he really is this radical neocon, which is what we're hearing from people on the left. Sam has basically said those things. This is what's driving me nuts about the liberals and attacking atheists and new atheists. Atheists are not causing a problem anywhere. That is just simply a fact. It just is. They're not. There are no large groups of atheists that want to kill people or are there atheists for drone strikes? I mean, you can argue, you can pinpoint. Look, I watched Cenk's interview for 3 hours with Sam. I thought Sam was absolutely brilliant and used airtight logic to calmly explain himself repeatedly on these things. So, for example, something like the preemptive nuclear strike, which I think is literally like a paragraph in his book, or a page maybe. What he says basically is that, in the 80s when we had a Cold War and you had two rational actors, you knew they weren't going to nuke each other because the other one knew they were going to get nuked. What he said about preempting nuclear strike, he said if you're dealing with a irrational actor, he was talking about, I believe, the mullahs in Iran, but you could apply that to ISIS right now. At a philosophical level, if we knew that ISIS had a nuke, would we nuke them? I think it's worth a debate. It doesn't automatically mean that you hate every Muslim person or that you want to invade every country. And I think this kind of like slandering and twisting of words that we've consistently seen on attacking of Bill and Sam is that's what the issue here is. It's not that they can do much more. I really don't think so.
So on that point there, I would say, and Cenk did this too in the most recent segment that was on this issue, I would say that not that Cenk and liberals are lying. Well, some, like CJ, I think does lie, but I think that most of the time what you're seeing is flippantly simplifying the issue. And you could say flippantly simplifying it to the point where it is misleading. But I don't think that they're doing it in a nefarious way.
See, I think it's a little more intended than you think. I think there is an intention to delegitimize Sam, to delegitimize Bill, which is crazy. Because even as Cenk says all the time, and by the way, Cenk's my former boss and a friend who I play basketball with every week. So I just want to put that out there very clearly. I think there's a movement to delegitimize these guys, and as Cenk says, he agrees with Sam 90%, except in that interview, it was a 3-hour, the pleasantries were pretty fake, and then Cenk will bring on people who he agrees with less, like Reza or CJ, I think, and it's much more pleasant. So I don't know what to make of all that, and I'm not a freaking psychiatrist. But I do think there's something more. I don't think it's just oversimplification. I think it's more than that.
So you wouldn't agree that when people, specifically like Cenk, because like I said, I agree that CJ's got other issues, but with somebody like Cenk, when he says like, oh, Sam would consider a nuclear first strike, and he uses that in like a dismissive way. You don't think that that's something where he's taking Sam's actual position, which is basically like, let's say Osama bin Laden got a nuke and he was the head of a country, right? That in that situation, yes, maybe. You don't think he's taking that more nuanced position and just flippantly simplifying it? See, I look at that and I think, I really don't think Cenk is lying when he says, I disagree with that. I think he's totally serious when he says, no, Sam is in favor, in this rare instance of a nuclear first strike, and I disagree with it.
I think of the specific video that you're talking about, the implication was, because they're Muslims and we wouldn't mind nuking Muslims. And that really has nothing to do with, again, the one paragraph of an entire book that Sam wrote on the topic. How do you deal with an irrational actor who had the worst weapons imaginable? I mean, for any of us, I'm not for preemptive nuclear war on anybody, whatever religion or race or whatever they are. Of course not. But if you came to me right now and said ISIS has a nuclear bomb and they're about to blow up New York City, and we can drop a nuke and it's going to kill 200,000 of their members and it's going to get rid of the nuke and blah, 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 blah. Well, wouldn't we all then consider preemptive nuclear action? And also, Sam was having a philosophical debate. So to imply that he's for this and for invading these countries. And Bill Maher, who's built an entire career, watch any of his stand-up specials about getting our troops. He talks about it all the time. Why do we have 60,000 or 80,000 troops in Germany? The war ended.
Yeah, no, he's totally right on foreign policy. No question.
So
but
it's
also, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut you off.
Yeah. Well, I do think there's a smearing of lines there. Look, I watched that interview for 3 hours. How do I have a better understanding of what was said in the interview? You know?
Well, the thing is, I think that, I think that if it was like the way you described it to me, the way you described the nuclear scenario, what you described was 100% no question a self-defense scenario. Like ISIS has a bomb and they're about to use it.
But that's precisely what he's mentioned in this tiny, he described it again in that interview. It was a tiny little portion of his book, and it was a philosophic argument, which we could, of course, debate philosophy all day long. But that was what the argument was. So if you make it seem like he's for nuclear preemption, you see, and especially when it's for the Muslims, that's not really what he's saying.
No. I think you and I totally agree, like I said at the beginning, that you simply cannot treat a guy like Sam Harris or Bill Maher or Richard Dawkins as if you're talking to Pat Robertson or Brian Fisher or Rush Limbaugh or somebody like that. And there is this, quick dismissal in that regards. But like I said, I think I personally see that totally from a guy like C.J. Whirlman, a little bit less from a guy like Reza, but I still see it from Reza, and even less probably from a guy like Greenwald. And then I'd even put another category for a guy like Cenk, where I disagree with him on the issue, but I don't think he's, lying or, purposely misstating.
Right. Like, look, I don't know. I can't rank all these guys on the list of, intellectual honesty. I can just see a little bit of what I watch and what I read. So I don't know that I can, rank them quite that specifically. But I've just seen over and over just absolute slanders and smears on what Sam has stated. And by the way, until the Bill Maher thing, I barely knew anything about Sam Harris. So I know a lot of people, you're Sam Harris disciple, and blah, 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 blah. No, I didn't even know who the guy was. Since then, I've read one of his books, and I've read a bunch of articles and things like that. But I came into that Bill Maher discussion as obviously a fan of Bill, but I came into that with a completely open mind. And by the way, as long as we're talking about, honesty and liars and things like that, again, if you watch the entire Bill Maher segment with Sam and Ben, which I did a full-on breakdown with no selective editing, unlike many other media places that selectively edited a lot of the stuff, I did a full-on breakdown with no selective editing. And if you watch it repeatedly, Ben implies that Sam and Bill are saying things that they're not. And that's what we've seen out of a bunch of these other guys. I just haven't seen can you one instance where you've seen Sam lie? I mean, lie about any of this? Or
no, I haven't seen Sam lie, but the only thing that, first of all, I do think there are some areas where there's legitimate disagreement with Sam. Like I would say even I have legitimate disagreement with Sam in some areas. But the only thing that really rubs me the wrong way when Sam does it is what he just did recently when he said Cenk was acting in, quote, bad faith. Because I don't think Cenk is lying. I think Cenk really believes what he's saying and he disagrees. And again, I can agree with you that he overstated some things in his last segment when I think he started out talking about Sam Harris's fans who attack him and slander him, and he kind of lumped in Sam with them, which I think was a mistake, and I think he would admit that was a mistake.
Listen, I don't want to make this, obviously I don't want to make this specifically about Cenk, but that's the person that we both personally know that's sort of in the mix of this thing. I mean, it seems to me that he repeatedly has implied that what Sam and Bill Maher, to a lesser extent, but what Sam has said is that it's all Muslims, all Muslims, all Muslims. And if you listen to have any of your audience listen to the 3 hours, he repeatedly says that's not what it is. He repeatedly quotes studies, and that's exactly what Bill has done. Now, you could argue whether Pew studies are correct in this manner, and you can argue all kinds of things, but he never says all. And I think it's absolutely been portrayed as if it's been all many, many times by all of these guys. for example, didn't Glenn Greenwald and Reza both retweet a meme of Sam Harris saying something about preemptive nuclear strike, knowing that it was completely out of context, to make it seem like that's what he's for? And I don't think it's I know that they're lower on your list of honesty here, but I think it's pretty malicious. I really do.
Well, like with a guy like CJ, like I said, I can agree, but I just don't. I mean, again, I think it's a disagreement with Cenk, and he can flippantly simplify the issue to the point where people view it as like a lie. But I think it is a genuine disagreement, specifically when it comes from him. Like I said, CJ is a different issue, and I think Glenn and Reza are somewhere in the middle there. But look, before we run out of time, because I want to get into some of the more substantive stuff here, as opposed to
let's roll.
So, here's one other thing I'd like for the new atheist to basically admit. And by the way, I consider myself a new atheist, as I mentioned on the show time and time again. So, like I said, the liberals should admit that terrorism isn't always from victimization. But I do want the new atheists to say that terrorism isn't always purely ideological based on, like, a direct reading of a holy book. Because there I do think there's a little bit of confusion, and they might be slightly off there, because oftentimes they focus on, like, take Wahhabism, for example. Wahhabism clearly is something that's totally ideological, totally based off of a fundamentalist interpretation of a book. And as I've always argued on my show, you can look at a situation like rising radicalization in Iran, and you could say that that is directly tied to U.S. intervention, and we kind of gave birth to the beast. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, of course, you can look at any of the holy books of the big three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and you can point to all kinds of crazy things that are not legal nor moral or whatever. So that goes without saying. I don't know. So I get your point, but I don't know that somebody like Sam, and I can't speak for all of them, and I can't speak for Sam actually, but I don't know that he's ever not acknowledged.
No. I'm just saying focus, Dave. I'm just saying his focus. In fact, I think if I sat down and talked to him, about this stuff, I think he'd largely agree when I make that point, and I point to specific regions where the increased radicalization, like Iraq, for example, was tied to us intervening. I think he would agree, but my only point is that I think that's what fuels a lot of the progressive attacks on him, is that you don't really see him putting a focus on that and stressing that point nearly as much as he stresses the point about ideological terrorism. And he makes it easy for his critics, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I guess at some level that is legit. And again, I don't know everything he has said on this. But also everyone has a different battle that they fight in life, and his is more in the spiritual and the atheist, religion, and neuroscience realm than the political science realm. So if he focuses a little bit more, and the best criticism we can come up with is, he should focus a little more on the geopolitical understandings of the world, coupled with the brain and religion, that's a pretty tepid criticism, which I think you mean it that way. But I got to say, it's funny. You describe yourself as a new atheist. This whole thing for the last year has caught. I don't know what I consider myself anymore. I will gladly, if you pick a topic, I could gladly tell you what I think. And I will always be a liberal in that I'm for liberal principles, and that I'm for racial equality, of course, and women's rights and gay rights and things like that. But this whole thing has definitely shifted what I think of the progressive movement as a whole. Not only to talk about the whole thing about free speech and freedom of expression, where I also saw some major flaws on the progressive side when it came down to the whole Charlie Hebdo thing, and I know you and I agreed on that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So
it's definitely just shaken my core of sort of where I fit in politically, but it's been a good time, because it's always good to have your beliefs challenged and things that you think are true maybe not be true, and figure out what you actually believe.
Final thing, just real quick, where do you think, just broadly speaking, on what policy issues do you think there's actually disagreement between Sam Harris versus the progressives that we named before?
On what? Well, that's the irony. That's the irony. They agree on 99% of things. There is Bill Maher does not want to fight. Look, I think you could make a very, of course, I've been very outspoken on TYT for the last years against drone strikes. I'm completely against bombing Syria the first time when we decided not to do it, and then against it when we did do it. And at least if we were going to do it, we should have congressional authority. But for some reason, Obama's allowed to launch wars without that, like he did in Libya also. So I don't think they would have many differences on anything. And that's why I find this not just flippant as you described it. I find it something a little more perverse about it, and I don't know exactly what it is. But I don't think it's just flippant because these guys don't disagree on a lot. But if you watch that 3-hour interview, it's extremely hostile and not listening. And I think there's a reason for that I can't quite put my finger on.
Okay, so I'll just wrap up my comments real quick.
If you have one, please give me one.
Yeah, no. I'll lay it out and then I'll let you respond, and that'll be the last word, and then we'll wrap it up here. But so in my opinion, the area I do totally agree, and I just think it's empirically pointing out the reality to say that a guy like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, Bill Maher, that these guys really do kind of agree with guys like Cenk and even probably Glenn Greenwald and people like that. I think they agree. But I think there are some legitimate areas of disagreement with Sam. And by the way, the same people that are voting down all the TYT videos on this are the same people that are voting up my videos on this. So it's not like there are no legitimate criticisms of Sam. It's that I think you need to have the right criticism, in my opinion. So I would say,
just real quick, I'm not above criticizing the guy. I haven't, in the scheme of this argument, in the scheme of this discussion that we're having, I haven't found a place where I've seen him be dishonest. I do hear what you're saying, that he could focus a little more on the geopolitical. But to me, that's not a criticism. That's like a life coach would say, you want to, get your critics a little quieter, do this. But anyway.
So the areas where I've kind of laid out that I disagree with him a little bit, and I was very specific in the way I broke it down, and you and I have had disagreements on this issue, but just broadly speaking, I disagree with him on the issue of Israel-Palestine. Broadly speaking, on the issue of torture, when he says that it should be illegal, so he's right about that, obviously, but he says, look, in rare cases, philosophically, it can be ethically justified. I actually disagree with that because I think just as a matter of principle, you become the devil you're trying to avoid when you even entertain the idea of torture. So I disagree with him slightly on that. And just on the issue, like when he criticized Chomsky, for example, I found some flaws in his argument there because basically what he said is Chomsky's problem is he focuses only on the quantifiable and not on the qualitative differences between a guy like Baghdadi and Dick Cheney. And he says, Dick Cheney's essentially better than a guy like Baghdadi. And I agree to a certain extent. I agree that Chomsky only does focus on, the quantitative difference and how many people have been killed by America and not like what kind of systems these people would put into place. But my criticism of Sam is that if anything, he focuses too much on the qualitative and not enough on the quantitative. So, yes, it's true that I'd rather live under Dick Cheney's system than Baghdadi's system, but I think one should be clear in laying out that, if because of Dick Cheney 1 million people die and because of Baghdadi, 20,000 people die or whatever it happens to be, you still got to put Dick Cheney in that bag of like ruthless, vicious scum who should have never been in power. See what I mean?
Right. So just to cap off here, so the Chomsky one, I haven't heard the interview, but I will listen to that. And I tend to think that you're probably hitting the nail on the head on that one. Then there was Israel, and what was the third one?
Torture, how he agrees it should be illegal, and he's right about that, but I think he says it could be ethically justifiable in some rare circumstances, like the ticking time bomb scenario.
Exactly. So on the torture one, I pretty much agree with you, actually, and I don't agree with him fully on that, because it's a slippery slope, and we often find that you get the wrong information, or they tell you whatever they want to hear. And yes, it would be impossible to have an empirically true situation in a vacuum where you knew if you tortured someone you could stop Twin Towers from falling, then of course everyone would say they could do it, but such a thing doesn't exist. And then just real quick on the Israel and the Palestinian thing, listen, I know that you and I disagree on a lot of this, and that's totally fine, and I never doubt your motives or your intellectual honesty for what you believe in. I hope you don't believe mine. My general look, if you read what Sam wrote about it, and he wrote I thought a pretty eloquent essay. I think it's actually it was in a podcast and they transcribed it. But if you listen to what he said, it is a pretty harsh critique of Israel. It's actually barely a defense of Israel. The only thing defending Israel that he says is that if one people on earth deserve a state based in some sort of ethnic or religious something, it's these people who have been exterminated throughout history across the world. That's a pretty tepid endorsement of a state. My support for Israel has far more to do with, because I am a liberal, and this is one of the things that drives me crazy about progressives, because I'm a liberal, I'll always stand for liberal principles, and there's only one place in the Middle East that stands for anything close to liberal principles. What country in the Middle East, besides Israel, could we do this right now and feel fully safe for our lives, saying whatever we want? I mean, we both know what country that is. Not to say there isn't problems, because of course there is, and there's a political problem, absolutely, and maybe it's half based in religion, or even more than that. But I think his defense was pretty tepid. So I think you might have more agreement with him on that one than you might think.
Okay, that's fair enough, man, and I'll definitely look into that. But we definitely got to have you on again, because I really love this conversation, and I think you and I, we can get into, if you want, next time around we could discuss Israel-Palestine, or we could discuss any other issue, whatever you want to talk about, because I really had fun doing this.
Yeah, sure. Listen, it's a pleasure talking to you. It's always a pleasure doing our thing on Twitter, and you're obviously welcome on my show anytime. I know they try to get you out to L.A. every now and again, but they say you won't take a day off from work.
What can I say, bro? I'm exclusive.
All right, well, get a little sunshine after you're done there.
I will. I'm turning into Casper. But Dave, thanks so much, man. For everybody who's just tuning in late or whatever, this is Dave Rubin, comedian, host of Rubin Report, formerly of the Young Turks Network, now part of Ryot News. Definitely check him out, guys. Dave, tell them where they could find you.
You guys can check out my show. It's youtube.com/Rubin Report, RUBIN Report. It's Twitter @Rubin Report, Facebook.com/Rubin Report. My branding guy was very specific with me.
All right, awesome, man. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks again for doing this. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks, brother. Have a good one.